Welcome to the Health Deli, your local stop for a fresh take on community health topics. Come on in, grab a number, and let the guys behind the counter, Mark, Ben, and Mike, tell you about today's specials.
Bonjour, y'all. It's Ben at the deli.
Bonjour, y'all. Are you from like southern France or something like that?
You know, we don't use labels here in the Health Deli.
No. I labeled. You're labeled bad.
Yeah, that's fair. So this is Ben, labeled bad as of 5 seconds ago, and I'm here with Mike.
Not for long. I might be leaving if this keeps up.
It's going to be a solo episode. And then Andrew's also on the line.
Hello, I'll just be normal today.
Fantastic.
That's
Love
about
that.
time.
Yes. But we are here again in the Health Deli studios in Big Rapids. So thank you, as always, to the digital media team here at Fair State University. Much better than where we were previously. So
We used to call that the dungeon.
yes, we did. Not on air, but in the background for sure.
Yeah, it's because the dungeon keepers wouldn't allow us to call it the dungeon.
Right. So this episode today, we have a very spicy meatball of an episode today. Mike, don't look at the door. You're staying here with me.
Do you know meatballs tend to have a lot of sodium in them, so I can't have them?
Ooh, sorry. I forgot. I won't bring that up again. But today we're talking all about weight loss. So I was going to call this the Slim Deli, but the last time I tried to rebrand us, I almost got court-martialed. So we're still the Health Deli. But we're talking all about weight loss. And in particular, there's been some new medications that have been in the news quite a lot that have been shown to do quite a good job in terms of weight loss. And so those are our GLP-1 agonists. And we'll talk about them in a little bit more detail in a second here. But Mike, why don't you go ahead and tell us what you got cooking?
I've been working on an episode about time travel. No.
Oh my gosh.
No, I've been working on an episode looking at how wellness and being healthy helps decrease the use of antibiotics. Mm-hmm. And also looking at building off one of the topics that we had the last 2 seasons, looking at questions from individuals in the community. We did questions from kids, questions from college students. I want to take it to the other extreme and talk to my peers, the grandparents now, and figure out what they remember to ask about health questions.
All right. Yeah, that should be really interesting. I'm sure a lot of people in the healthcare field know that our parents ask us a lot of healthcare questions. So there's a lot we can do with that for sure.
Why are you saying your parents are old? So Mr. and Mrs. Pontefract, Ben has just called you old. Please complain.
I think they are younger than you, Mike. So if that helps at all. Fantastic. So I am working on a couple episodes too. Mike, you brought up a little bit ago, but doing spongiform encephalopathies, so kind of like prion diseases. I won't spoil too much about them, but they're very interesting processes. And I also had an idea of potentially doing an episode about seasonal allergies. So like, what even are they, and like, why does that kind of stuff happen? Seemed kind of interesting to me. So yeah, that's kind of what is in the future. But today we are talking about weight loss. And so have you heard about any of these new weight loss drugs or seen anything like this in the news, Mike?
I have, and it's interesting because years ago, because these are not new drugs.
No.
And years ago when they first came out, that was one of the advantages for putting people on these medications for diabetes.
Yeah.
Is it also, unfortunately, a lot of the medications for diabetes were associated with weight gain. Mm-hmm. And these were ones that were associated with weight loss. And that was important for type 2 diabetes because it's that, excess weight that leads to some insulin resistance. So yeah, totally different topic, but my long answer distilled down to short. Yes, I have.
Fantastic. Yeah. And we will talk a little bit about diabetes and what these medications role in them. But yeah, just so everyone is aware of what we're talking about, the medications, the class are GLP-1 agonists. And we'll talk about kind of what they do in a second, but their names, the generic names are semaglutide, liraglutide, and tirzepatide.
They sound like aliens that are invading the earth and looking to dominate and take over.
They really do. They really do, which is why the manufacturers have came up with trendy brand names for them. And so the weight loss versions of them, because there's a version for diabetes and there's a version for weight loss. So the weight loss versions are Wegovy, Saxenda, and Zepbound.
And those are supposed to be better?
I think Saxenda sounds pretty cool. It's got an X in it.
Wegovy?
That's fair. That one's not as good. But yeah, so those are the medications that we're talking about today. So we're going to talk about how they work, how effective are they, how much do they cost, and should people really be looking into them?
So now, before you jump into that, though, because we mentioned they came out a while ago for diabetes, they weren't called those. And so are these the same drugs now that have new names for a weight loss indication?
Yeah, great question. And so you are 100% correct. These did come out quite a while ago for diabetes. And at that time, they were called Ozempic, Victoza, and Mounjaro, but they are the same medication. They might have different packaging. They may have different instructions in terms of like, start at this low dose and then slowly increase up. So the way that we use them might be a little different, but they are pretty much the exact same medication.
And that could lead into another episode on patent extensions and the way that drug companies gouge us for paying high prices for long periods of time.
Yeah, that is actually an incredibly interesting episode that I would love to do. So we'll definitely have to put that in our journal for maybe season 4. But yeah, so let's go ahead and just talk about these medications in terms of like how they work. And I'm going to look at this in the lens of diabetes, because like you said, Mike, this is initially what we were using these for. So for the people at home, diabetes mellitus, or type 2 diabetes, that's usually what we refer to when we say diabetes. Really what the problem is that in our body, for someone with diabetes, there is too much sugar in our blood for one reason or another. And so all this extra sugar in our blood can actually damage our blood vessels. It can damage our nervous system. Our body doesn't like having too much sugar.
My body likes having too much sugar.
It doesn't, Mike. It actually doesn't.
No, it does.
All right, we'll get some donuts in here then.
Pixie sticks.
Are donuts low in salt?
No, they might have salt. Pixie sticks,
dang.
pure sugar.
All right, perfect.
I call that a health food.
Can you replace salt with sugar in recipes and just go from there?
Great idea.
I
like where your head's at.
All right, so the Health Deli does not give dietary advice by any means, but yeah. So with diabetes, if you're eating too many Pixie sticks, you might have too much sugar in your blood, and that causes problems in the short term and in the long term. And so these GLP-1s, which is how I'm going to refer to them instead of saying their names, they decrease sugar in a couple of different ways. So they decrease how much sugar our body makes on its own. And so it kind of helps in that regard.
How does your body, I didn't know your body made sugar. Where does that come from?
Yeah, great question. And so our liver actually will make sugar. And so we need sugar to survive. That's what fuels our cells. And so there's a mechanism in our liver where it's like, oh, if I don't have enough sugar, I'm going to make a little bit to hopefully keep me alive.
Okay, so now I'm remembering there's a process where when you eat something, your body can convert some of the sugars that you don't need right away into something and store them until you need it later.
Yeah.
And then the liver can reverse it.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And so that's kind of how we get our adipose tissue or our fat tissue is kind of what you're saying there, when our body's storing that extra sugar.
Why is Andrew keeps pointing at me when you said adipose or fat tissue?
We'll just ignore that. So that's one mechanism. But the main way that our GLP-1s help with diabetes is they actually make it so we don't want to eat as much. And so they do that by slowing down how quickly food moves through our digestive tract. So normally we eat food and then our body's like, oh, I have all this food in my stomach and in my intestines. I don't need to eat anymore because I'm full. And so then your body sends that message to your brain. Your brain's like, I'm full. I don't want to eat anymore. And then you stop eating. The way that the GLP-1s help with this is that they slow down the digestion process. So essentially you're going to feel full quicker because there's going to be food in your digestive system for longer, and it's going to make you feel full for longer as well because it takes longer for that digestion to actually happen. So if you're eating less food, you have less, sugar in your body, and so therefore you're helping the diabetes. Does that kind of make sense, Mike?
Yeah. And then just for our listeners, GLP-1, that refers to glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonists. Yeah. So that's what we mean. So there's this thing called glucagon that floats around in our body, and this is kind of blocking the effect of that to make your body think that there's more glucagon around.
So not necessarily blocking, but kind of the same idea. So our body makes GLP and we're essentially just giving our body more of it. And so, yes, we are using that same receptor.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that's really how our GLP-1s work. And so it can cause weight loss because your body doesn't want to eat as much. And so we know if we consume fewer calories, we're going to have more weight loss, right? Because that's really what it comes down to, is how many calories we consume. But it also does some of these other things to help with diabetes. And so that's really how they work with diabetes. I do also want to bring up some side effects. So we've known for a very long time that these GLP-1s have side effects. The most common thing we see is an injection site reaction. So I didn't mention this before, but these medications are injections for the most part. All of the weight loss ones are injections. There is one pill, but that one's not for weight loss. So you do have to inject it into your body, and so that can cause irritation to your skin, but usually it's not too bad. The most common side effect we see is nausea. And so patients, some of them take this and feel incredibly nauseous for a while after they get their dose. And it kind of makes sense why, right? So we're slowing down our digestive tract, and so we're messing with that system, which is something that can contribute to nausea. And that's another reason why maybe people don't want to eat as much, right? If you're feeling nauseous, you're probably not going to want to eat. That's just essentially how that works.
Well, and like you said, though, slowing down your GI tract, food's got to go from your stomach, and then you have those waves that come through and push it along through your intestines and go. But if the stomach doesn't empty as fast and it doesn't go through that, transition to the other parts of the intestine as fast, you get that sense of being fuller longer, right?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And so the main side effect is nausea. The other thing I want to bring up is that these medications are pretty expensive. And so I don't have a exact cost for us, at least not here. I might have one a little bit later. But these medications can be hundreds, potentially thousands of dollars a month for these medications. I think I do have a price in the future. And so that's really the main thing that people think about with downsides with this medication, is because it works pretty well. Doesn't have a whole lot of side effects that we've seen, at least when we were using it for diabetes, but it was very expensive. But if the insurance companies would be willing to cover it, then we'd think, okay, should be worth it, essentially. Okay, so that's kind of our GLP-1s. And I think that's all stuff that you've probably already knew about, Mike. Does that sound fair?
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's talk about weight and some of the negative impacts of having too much weight, being overweight. Okay? I'm trying not to look at your mic.
Hey, you're staring me right in the eyes. Andrew's pointing at me again. It's like... Again, just because I bare my soul with all my other medical conditions, you guys can't lay off the fact that I just, grew up eating Twinkies and stuff like that.
And pixie sticks and all that kind of stuff.
Especially the 3 foot tall pixie stick. Ain't nothing wrong with too much pixie stick.
That sounds terrifying.
I'm not even going to tell you about when the kids used to snort the pixie sticks.
I think all kids have done that. I think I did that at some point in life. But anyway. Weight and health.
Wait for what? Oh. That weight.
Yeah.
I thought you were telling me to wait.
Nope. Not today. Not this time, Mike.
Okay.
So what are some of the negative impacts of having essentially too much extra fat tissue or adipose tissue? So first off, how do we actually identify if somebody is overweight? So have you ever heard of the body mass index, Mike?
Yeah, BMI. Yeah,
BMI. So essentially what that does is it looks at how tall you are, and it looks at how much you weigh, and it uses that to calculate your BMI.
So why don't they just use your weight?
So that's a good question. So if you are taller, then you probably are going to weigh more than someone who's shorter, right? 'Cause you're going to have more bone, you're going to have more skin, your organs are going to be larger. And so we do need to take into account your height as well.
Okay.
Yep. So we're going to look at both of those things. Notably, the BMI doesn't look at things like muscle. It only considers if you have... It essentially assumes that your extra weight is fat. And so you could have a professional bodybuilder. They might have a really high, just like Mike, and they might have a really high BMI. That doesn't mean they're overweight or obese. It just means they're incredibly muscular.
And that's been one of the criticisms of BMI is it maybe did not normalize weight the way it was originally intended.
So yeah, even though there are flaws, that's what we got. So we're going to use BMI. Okay. So everyone's aware, if you have a BMI of 25 to 29, essentially, you are considered overweight. If your BMI is over 30, then you are considered to be obese. So that's essentially the main cutoffs for BMI. All right. So per the CDC, so the Centers for Disease Control.
Well, first of all, this BMI thing, I don't have a scale that calculates my BMI at home.
Yeah, great question, Mike. So there are a lot of calculators online. If you really just Google BMI calculator, you can find one on there, and it just asks you for your height and your weight, and it'll calculate your BMI for you.
Okay.
So, yeah. So if you're curious, you can do that.
All right.
Great point. All right. So the Center for Disease Control, they essentially looked at patients who were overweight or obese and compared them to patients that were not. So they were, normal weight or underweight, essentially. And what they found was people that were overweight or obese were at increased risk for the following things: high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, stroke, which is a blood clot in your brain, cancer, arthritis, which is inflammation in your joints, and mental health illnesses such as anxiety and depression. And finally, death from any cause. So essentially, if you are overweight or obese, you are at a higher risk of dying than someone who is not.
Death from any cause seems kind of like a cop-out.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. So they could have potentially died for something not weight related, right? In that situation.
Hit by a car.
Right, exactly. But people are at high risk for all these different disease states, essentially.
All right.
So as a blanket statement, it's a pretty well recognized idea that not being overweight is a good idea. So trying to avoid being overweight or obese to decrease your risk of some of these negative side effects, which is why we're talking about weight loss right now. Okay. So how is it exactly that GLP-1s, these medications we're talking about, cause weight loss? So interestingly, they don't actually like mechanically do anything to our fat or adipose tissue in our body. They do not cause us to burn more fat tissue or do anything like that. Really, the only way that they cause weight loss is they decrease how much somebody is eating, as we talked about before. So, slowing your digestive tract, you don't want to eat as much, and so therefore you don't, and then you have less calories, and so you have weight loss.
Gotcha. So they're not like a magic fat melting shot.
Nope, unfortunately not. And it's actually really interesting to me because really all it's doing is changing our behavior, right? It's making us not want to eat. So if we just did that in the first place, if we just ate less, it'd have the same exact effect.
Which again sounds like another very interesting episode in terms of what drives individuals to eat.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously your body gets to a place where you're supposed to eat to replenish nutrients and get energy, but there's some people that use food for other reasons like coping mechanisms and a variety of other things. And so these drugs, it sounds like through the manipulation, in the stomach and that sensation of fullness are getting you back to maybe a more natural state of hunger.
Yeah, potentially. I agree with you, Mike. It's an incredibly nuanced issue that we would need an entire episode to talk about is, the psychology of eating and those kinds of things. So I agree with you. We probably should.
Let's pause for the Healthy Minute, brought to you by the Winery at Young Farms. Today's Healthy Minute is assess your work-life balance. Intentionally assess the time and energy you contribute to your career and your home life. Regularly ask your family to openly comment on their expectations and satisfaction with your allotted time and effort. Achieving work-life balance is not just about stepping away from work. It's about finding fulfillment in all aspects of life. A balanced life allows you to pursue personal passions and interests, contributing to a more satisfied and motivated professional life. Striking this equilibrium also often results in a positive attitude toward work and increased job satisfaction and productivity. That was the Healthy Minute, brought to you by the Winery at Young Farms in Mecosta, Michigan. Please visit www.thewineryatyoungfarms.com for more information.
Boom, chicka boom, healthy, 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 healthy.
All right, welcome back, everybody. So that was a fantastic Healthy Minute, as always. So thank you, Mark, for that. And so now I think we can get into the interesting stuff, the studies. Are you excited, Mike?
Not as excited as you are, Ben.
That's fair. I don't think anyone will ever be as excited as I am for medical literature.
No, you're Mr. Literature Geek.
I am. And I'm here for it. And I hope you are too.
It's because I locked the door.
I did that on purpose. So we're going to just talk about one study today because there's a lot to talk about with it. So we're going to talk about a study called Once Weekly Semaglutide in Adults with Overweight or Obesity, and it's by John Winding and colleagues, and it's published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2021. So this is essentially using one of these medications, and it's a one injection once a week for obesity and overweight patients to see if it can cause weight loss. Okay. Before we get into the actual study design, there's one thing I want to bring up. So semaglutide, the brand name, which I'm pretty sure is Wegovy. Yep, that's the weight loss brand. It's made by Novo Nordisk. So obviously all medications are made by a drug manufacturer. Novo Nordisk makes Wegovy.
And so the diabetes form of that is what, Ozempic?
Yep, that's Ozempic.
Okay. This is getting really confusing. That's why healthcare providers a lot of the time just refer to things as their generic name instead of their brand name because of issues like this.
Right, exactly. It can get very confusing very quickly.
Okay.
For sure. Okay, so Novo Nordisk, they actually fully designed and conducted this study. So normally when we do studies like this, yes, we know that funding has to come from the drug manufacturer. In a lot of cases, these are very expensive studies to conduct, but usually they will give money to some independent researchers and let them research it on their own. And then they'll just say, give us the results and we'll publish. We'll kind of go from there. But that wasn't the case here. So Novo Nordisk actually fully designed everything. They conducted the study, which doesn't necessarily mean we can't trust the study, but it's something we need to keep in mind, is that there may have been some design decisions that may have been strategically made for one reason or another.
And so, that's something we call bias,
Yes.
in the medical literature. And we try to teach our students all the time, as you're interpreting medical literature, watch out for bias.
Yep, because there's a lot of bias here, right? If Novo Nordisk can prove that semaglutide causes weight loss, they're going to make a lot of money off of this, right? So they have a huge incentive, a huge bias to show that there is a difference here. Yeah, very interesting. So I'm glad you brought that up, Mike. Okay, so with that out of the way, let me go ahead and, Mike, I'm just going to tell you about this study. And you can tell me what you think about it. All right. So patient population, there's about 1,900 patients enrolled.
So that's a pretty big study.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a good amount of patients. So far, so good. All of these patients must have self-reported that they have been unsuccessful at losing weight at some point in the past. So these are patients that are probably going to be harder to cause weight loss for, right? Because they failed before. Not necessarily failed, but they weren't successful.
Now, is that lose any weight or maintain the weight loss? Because that's always been a thing with weight loss studies is sometimes it's easy to lose weight, difficult to keep weight off.
Right. Yeah. And that's a great question. I actually don't know. They just said unsuccessful.
Okay.
They may have explained it in the appendix.
Okay.
Okay. So for these patients, or for this population, they had to have had a BMI of over 27. That was required to be a part of the study. And if we look at the patient population, more than 90% of them had a BMI over 30. So the vast majority of these patients would be considered obese in this situation. Okay. And they then excluded all patients who had an eating disorder or uncontrolled depression. So we've talked a lot about how mental health can potentially cause things like weight gain, but they said that they just are going to remove everyone with depression, which is, something that can cause weight gain is not great. Okay. So that is our patient population. And then what did they actually do? So the intervention here, they made sure that all patients were on a diet and had, quote, lifestyle interventions as well. And so I'm sure you're asking, Mike, what does that mean? That's a very broad idea, right? So essentially all they did is they required that people met with a dietitian, and that dietitian gave them advice on decreasing caloric intake and exercise. They did not report if the patients actually did any of that, or maybe some did and some didn't. All that needed to happen was they had to meet with a dietitian.
And they don't necessarily control for that because, in a design like this, with that many patients, they assume maybe about the similar amounts in each of the groups are going to take the recommendations and do diets. So that's kind of controlling for the confounders based off the size of the population, right?
Yep, that's the idea. Not necessarily always going to be true, but yes, because it's hard to control for all these things for sure. Okay.
So far it's sounding reasonable.
Yeah. So far so good. So a total of 1,300, so 1,300 patients got semaglutide and about 650 got placebo. So that was kind of the split. About twice as many got the medication.
Now, is that common to design a study where you weight it for one arm more than the other?
It is fairly common to do things that way. That's not really like a red flag for me, for any means.
Okay. And why do they typically do that?
Yeah, so we do that so we can hopefully get more information about the medication itself, right? Because we have a general idea of what's going to happen in the placebo group, but hopefully we're going to get more information about what we're really interested about, which is the medication.
Okay. And so like you said, so far, it's all good.
Yeah. Okay. I don't see any major issues right now.
All right.
Okay, so let's get to the results. So in the semaglutide arm, so the GLP-1 arm, patients lost about 15% of their body weight over the study time, which I forget exactly what it was. I believe it was a month or two.
Holy cow. So for me, let's say hypothetically I weigh 160 pounds. If I lost 15% of my body weight, that'd be 24 pounds.
Yeah. And that's a noticeable amount of weight, right?
Yeah. Yeah. When you first said 15%, I was like, oh yeah, why don't we set the bar lower? But that's pretty significant. And if you, obviously that pound value is going to go up the more you weigh. So 15% is a decent, amount.
Yeah. And let's imagine someone with really like some morbid obesity. So they are 300 pounds. That would be 45 pounds that they lost then. So yeah, that is a significant amount of weight loss, right?
Okay.
So that was the GLP-1 arm. In the placebo arm, patients lost about 2.5% of their body weight. So not a lot.
But still some, because maybe the effect of the diet and exercise and the counts or the dietitian and stuff like that. So, okay.
Yeah. And so if we kind of subtract those out from each other, we can say that the benefit of using a GLP-1 was a weight loss of about 12.5% of your body weight, because we're saying that's just the GLP-1. The diet and exercise was probably about 2.5%.
Okay.
Okay. So this was statistically significant. So we've talked about that before in an earlier episode of the Health Deli. The p-value was less than 0.001. All this means is that the chances that this difference we saw being completely due to random chance is very low. So this is very likely that our GLP-1 was actually causing this weight loss.
Okay.
Okay. So it does really appear that this medication causes weight loss, and it appears that it was designed fairly well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Until you get the statisticians involved.
Yeah. So we didn't really talk about the statistical analysis on things, but let's talk a little bit about the interpretation then. So how significant is a reduction in weight of, let's be generous and just say that entire 15% was from the GLP-1. We talked before how it was maybe more like 12.5%, but let's just be generous here. So let's go back to kind of an example. So I am 5'7", okay? If I were obese, I would have to be around 200 pounds. That gives me a BMI of 30, like almost exactly 30. So I would need to weigh less than 160 pounds to no longer be overweight, because that's our goal, right? Because we know that if you're overweight or obese, that's when you're high risk for, death, cardiovascular disease, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so if I weighed 200 pounds and I lost 15% of my body weight, I would still be 170 pounds. So I would still be considered overweight at that point in time.
But would there be, as you're making progress towards something, would there still be a benefit? I would imagine that it's not like a yes, no, flip the switch, but there's gradients of benefit that you might be able to argue.
Yeah, and you definitely could. We don't have a lot of great data on what's the difference between a BMI of 29 versus 28 or, something like that. I agree with you. There probably is a real difference there. We don't really know what it is, though.
Okay.
And so all I'm trying to get across here is, yes, we did cause a good amount of weight loss, but it didn't really solve the problem, right? I am still overweight in that situation. Okay. So in the United States, 31% of patients are overweight and 42% of patients are obese. And then about 9% of patients have what we call severe obesity, which is a BMI of over 40. And so as we just kind of highlighted, even if you take a GLP-1, you're probably not going to have so much weight loss that you're no longer in one of these high risk categories. You probably would have less risk, like you're saying, Mike, because you're, shifting down weight a little bit, but it's not going to kind of get you out of the woods at this point in time. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And for this, that's all they looked at was just that initial weight loss. They didn't look, as I'm thinking more of a quality of life type of outcomes. Because they lost the weight, did their blood pressure come down? Because they lost the weight, were they more likely to be able to get up and exercise more because their joints hurt less or whatever else? So there could have been a lot of other things theoretically that they could have studied, but might have made a much longer, more expensive study.
Yeah.
And did they? What was the time frame that this was done over? Did you mention that? How long was this study?
Yeah, I do think I forgot to write that down. I want to say it was something around 6 months, something like that. So it was a decent amount of time.
So, but they looked at, so they lost that weight over time, but then they didn't look if they regained that weight.
And that's what we're about to get into.
Okay.
So and so another thing I want to give a little bit of credit to this study. I think they did look at some things like blood pressure and those kinds of things. I just didn't report it here.
Okay.
So if you are interested in that, there is more data.
So this
out
is a Ben flaw.
There is. Can you believe it?
Hey,
flawed
Andrew,
in some way.
I've been telling you he's been flawed for seasons, and now we finally got him to admit.
Oh my gosh. Now we have evidence in front of everybody.
That's right.
end of the story, kind of with this particular study, it does appear that the GLP-1s did cause a decent amount of weight loss. Like I'm not going to argue against that. But the long-term effects of that, we're not entirely sure. The additional health benefits, we're not entirely sure. Okay. So now you brought up something, Mike, that I think is very important that we talk about is the weight loss permanent? And so as we talked about previously, the way that these medications work is they just make your body not want to eat as much food, right? And so what we do see is that if somebody stops taking this GLP-1 medication, in most situations, the weight loss reverses. So the patient goes back to their normal weight, which makes sense, right? So there's no longer this thing that's making you not want to eat anymore. And so if you hadn't changed your lifestyle, then you're just going to regain that weight. You're going to start eating the way you did before. Mm-hmm. And so that is something that is a very real concern with these medications, especially when it comes down to thinking about how much they cost. So if I'm saying in order to get this 15% weight loss, I need my patient to be on, let's just pick on Wegovy. It can be any of the GLP-1s. I need this patient to be on Wegovy for the rest of their life in order to maintain the benefit that they're getting here. So this isn't something where you just take it for 6 months and then stop. Okay. All right. So I want you, Mike, to guess for me, how much do you think Wegovy costs, let's say per month? So it's 1 pen once a week. So that's 4 pens total. How much?
4 pens. $400, $500.
Okay. $500. What do you think, Andrew? A month of Wegovy. How much do you think that
for
costs?
the 4 pens?
Yep, for the 4 pens.
$800.
$800. Okay. So once a week per pen, $500 per pen.
Per week.
Per week. So if you have 4 pens for the month, that is $2,000 a month to be on this medication.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's a lot of money as you are.
So my brain all of a sudden is going at insurance companies and stuff going, are you bleeping kidding me? Mm-hmm. You're going to bankrupt us.
Yeah.
And so, and then you have to really start thinking of, okay, weight loss. Weight loss to me is cosmetic. Okay, so if you just look at a 15% reduction in weight loss, that's purely cosmetic and it's not worth the money. But like we talked about before, if you can just demonstrate long-term that there's decreases in all these other things that cause a lot of money, because we know it's expensive to treat cancer.
Yep.
It's expensive to treat diabetes. So if you can prevent those, you make an argument that this becomes cost-effective treatment. But I'm gathering that since these are relatively new agents, we don't have a lot of those data.
Correct. So it's my understanding that there are quite a few studies that are ongoing right now that are looking at what you brought up earlier. If I change my BMI from 29 to 28, how much is that actually benefiting somebody? Because that's what it comes down to here now, right?
And I looked real quick, and it, according to like the Mayo Clinic and the American Heart Association, if you lose 2.2 pounds, for every 2.2 pounds you lose, you can drop your blood pressure by 1 millimeter of mercury.
Okay.
And so that's just a kind of a general thing. That's not necessarily specific to these patients, but just from the, if you can imagine you lost 40 pounds, you can take somebody who has very bad control of their blood pressure to good control. So they might still be non-obese,
right?
But again, there might be other benefits, but that's what we need to find. Is there truly that benefit to justify the cost of these drugs?
Right, exactly. If we're going to be spending $2,000 a month, I want clear data that yes, this medication is prolonging my life. It is making my life better, because that's a lot of money.
Because if you think about, okay, if one of those individuals, if you avoid one stroke for one of those individuals, a stroke or a hospital visit for an MI, that's tens of thousands of dollars.
Right.
And so you start thinking, okay, if I avoid that in a big number of the population, this drug does seem to have value.
Yeah, and that gets down to the very messy science of pharmacoeconomic studies. So
that's what I keep telling my brother. My brother is a pharmacoeconomist, and I tell him he's just making numbers up. And
yeah, well, sometimes it can feel that way because it's a more soft kind of science. There's a lot of estimating that you got to do, and so
voodoo science,
a little bit like that. And so that kind of brings us back around to there may be other ways that we could spend that money that's more effective. So let's say instead of spending $2,000 a month for Wegovy, I buy a patient healthy groceries. So I'm saying I'm going to give you, let's even say $1,000 a month, and you can spend that on these specific kinds of groceries. We're going to help you make meals. We're going to provide all of that for you. I'm sure you guys have at least heard of HelloFresh or something like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So those are those meal delivery services where they just send you a bunch of ingredients and you make the food yourself.
Okay.
Maybe insurance companies should do that instead. That might be a more cost-effective way of doing things, right? If we make sure the patient is getting healthy food, that'll be a lot less expensive than $2,000 a month for this medication.
They
Right?
can
that gets
provide
down
low
to-
salt options.
There you go.
Potentially.
But that gets down to one of the root causes or arguments in our society is it your responsibility to keep me healthy? Or is that my responsibility? And, that's problematic. And can I make you be healthy? I see you smoking a cigarette. I know that's bad. Can I adjust your insurance rates, or can I hold it against you because you won't quit smoking? If I see you over there with a 6-pack of candy bars and you're just shoving them in, and then I blame you. It's like, well, you're doing it to yourself. Why should I pay anything for you? I mean, so there's a whole lot of controversy related to some of these more lifestyle related disease things.
But don't we need something pulling in the opposite direction? Because the fast food restaurants make it super easy to pull in there and buy an
I
unhealthy
supersize
meal.
it. They did away with small. Isn't medium now small, and small is extinct? In Americans, unless we can get all you can eat, that ain't a good deal.
Not worth it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so these are all great points that are being brought up, but these are conversations that are currently being had at insurance companies. Is if we are going to spend $2,000 on this super expensive drug, maybe we should look into options that are less expensive, but maybe as effective.
And maybe that's a better place, because I know that from a legislative standpoint, there have been some cities, and counties that have tried to outlaw certain foods or make sure that vending machines didn't have candy bars in high schools.
Right.
And then having people push back. It's my right as an American to have a Snickers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Andrew, did you have something more intelligent than I had?
I'm just wondering, this is probably going to open up a complete can of worms, but so the cost at $500 per pen, is that the actual cost that it takes, or is this the cost because of all the development and research they've done? Why do they have to charge that much?
Yeah. So this is an incredibly complicated topic. You can get into like pharmacy benefit managers and all this different stuff. The simple answer is it's a business, right? Sure. So Novo Nordisk, if we're going to continue picking on them, no particular reason, they exist to make money and they exist to get money for their shareholders, right? If they don't do that, they go out of business. And so there's a big cost to making these medications. A lot of medications don't make it to market and they're just sunk costs. They cost money for nothing. And so these medications can kind of recoup some of that loss. And so that is part of it. Another part of it is they want to make a profit. They want to make as much profit as possible because that's how businesses work. And so, yeah, it does not cost that much to make the pen, if that is your question.
It's America. We have a free market economy. So you throw it out there and see what the market bears. And, depending on who your payer is, individuals versus insurance companies, they all have different motives. They all have different perspectives. And yeah, this is really messy.
Yeah. We definitely need to get Dylan back on here to talk about the economics of.
Or we'll get my brother on here, that dude that I made fun of, that pharmacoeconomist. He talks about drugs and money all the time. God,
Yeah.
I hate to say that I just said he'd be useful for something.
I mean, honestly, that would be an incredibly interesting topic, though.
Okay, well,
sure.
maybe we'll have to get him involved.
All right, maybe we can just like have him write the script and we won't have him on the deli, that kind of thing. All right. So that brings us to the end of this episode. The last thing I want to bring up is, do I think nobody should be on GLP-1s? And the answer to that is no. I think we talked about how there are a lot of benefits that can come from using these medications. They do cause reductions in weight. We do see that. I think we just need to be smart about how we use these medications because of how expensive they are, essentially.
So it's not like everybody can't get them. There's going to be a certain population that will benefit and benefit more than another population. So again, Ben, I'm looking at you and, and if you go one day, look in the mirror and go like, oh, I'm feeling fat, I should get on one of these weight loss pens. I'd be looking at you and go, Ben, just no.
Right.
I mean, that's not good. I mean, that's not what you need it for. You don't need it to like drop a pound. These are people that have medical complications because of the excess weight that they're carrying around. And those might be the individuals where there's a benefit. So there needs to be restrictions put in place and criteria in place for who might benefit and therefore who should be using these medications.
Yeah, I would say so. And one example that because I've talked to my friends about this before.
You don't have friends.
All right. I was talking to myself in the mirror about this. And what I told myself at that point in time was losing weight is very difficult. And there's a lot of mental and emotional energy that goes into that, right? And it can be really disheartening if you change your diet, you go and you start exercising and you don't see weight loss, right? You're like, I put in all this effort and I'm not seeing any benefit from that after a week or two, because it's hard, right? These medications can help give you that initial boost of weight loss while you're trying to do those lifestyle changes. And so if you are working with like a dietitian, you're doing exercising, this can give you some of that positive reinforcement that's like, what you're doing is working. Let's keep doing this. And that will motivate people to continue on this process. So I really liked that idea.
So one of the things that I hear you saying is weight loss, like so many other things like smoking cessation, alcohol abuse, it kind of takes a team. It kind of takes a number of different approaches to come at it. And it's not just, here, take this injection, you're good. There's behavioral changes, there's support, there's everything else. So don't look at this as, I do this and that's it. So,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. And it's not a personal failing, right? This is a very difficult thing to do for a multitude of reasons. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you, Mike and Andrew, for, I think, the help with this episode.
Yeah. Well, we'd like to thank you, but we can't figure out what we're going to thank you for.
That's fair. That's fair. But thank you, everyone, for listening to another fantastic episode of The Health Deli, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for stopping by the Health Deli to sample some of our wares. We're open 24/7 on Facebook and Twitter at The Health Deli, or visit thehealthdeli.com to send us a question or find any of our locations. Please come again. We will be regularly stocking the shelves with fresh content and new wellness specials. As always, we want to give a special thank you to Andrew Tingley and the crew at Ferris State University's Television and Digital Media Production Program. Until next time, so long from the Health Deli, where the topics are tasty, the takes are fresh, and the discussion is free.
Donuts are healthy. Bacon is healthy. Salami is healthy. Pizza is healthy. The end.
Wow.
Well, that's totally ending up at the end of this episode.
Everything Mike can't have is healthy.
The Health Deli does not give dietary advice by any means.
Mike and Ike's. No fat, no cholesterol, no salt. Health food.
Boom. What more do you want?
Done.